Good morning, students. So far, we have discussed about CPU scheduling algorithms for a system with a single central processing unit. In today's lecture, I'm going to talk about scheduling approaches in a multiprocessor computing environment. This is how I have organized my lecture. I'll be first talking about approaches to multiprocessor scheduling and associated issues. At the end, I'll be talking about thread scheduling approaches. Before I go ahead and discuss about different multiprocessor scheduling approaches, let me first define multiprocessor scheduling. What is multiprocessor scheduling? Given a set of runnable processes and number of processors, multiprocessor scheduling is nothing but scheduling all the processes on the available processors in minimum possible time and such that none of the processes overlap during its execution. So having defined what is multiprocessor scheduling, now let us look at two different ways of multiprocessor scheduling. The first method is called asymmetric multiprocessor scheduling and the second one is called symmetric multiprocessor scheduling. Let us take up one by one and see what they are. Here we can see there are 5 central computing units and several processes which are lined up for execution. In asymmetric multiprocessor scheduling, one of the CPUs, in this case I have taken this CPU, acts as master and makes scheduling decisions on behalf of other processors which are in this case called slaves. Master processor not just makes scheduling decisions, but it also does IO processing and other system related tasks. The responsibility of the slaves is to execute the user code. Though this scheduling approach appears to be very simple to implement, the major drawback of this approach is that all the slave processors have to wait for the scheduling decision to be made by the master, in the sense that they will have to wait till the master says which process to execute. So this is a time consuming process and it is going to drastically bring down the performance of the system. So therefore we go for symmetric multiprocessor scheduling. In symmetric multiprocessor scheduling, it is also popularly called as SMP scheduling. All the CPUs are peers. That means they are equally competent. These processes which are ready for execution, these could be given to any of these central processing units. That means the scheduling decision, all the processes are involved in making the scheduling decision. So this means every CPU runs its own scheduler and these schedulers will look at the queue and pick up the processes for execution depending on the scheduling policy used. So what are the assumptions here? All the central processing units are homogeneous or equally competent and all these processors run their own schedulers and they make the scheduling decisions or they pick up the processes from the ready queue. Now symmetric multiprocessor scheduling can be realized using a global queue data structure. That means there is a ready queue present inside the RAM or main memory and this ready queue has got processes which are runnable or which are ready for running. Now these CPUs which are running their own schedulers will pick up the processes from this ready queue. We have to ensure that no two processors will pick up the same process for execution in this case. That is one of the dangers, right? Otherwise, in this approach, the CPU utilization will be better. And this is a fair approach. All the processors will get chance to run on the CPUs, and there is no question of starvation here. See, like I said, here we have to ensure that no two processors will pick up the same process. Here, processor, when it is reading or looking at the ready queue, it has to obtain a lock on that, which means that if CPU 0 obtains the lock on this global queue, the other processors have to wait till the CPU which has obtained the lock releases the lock. Only then the other processors can look at this global queue, which is the major drawback or disadvantage of this approach. For example, see, as the number of processors increases, the idle time of these processors will also increase, because the lock on this global queue is given in a sequential manner. So that is one of the disadvantages of this approach. Another disadvantage of this approach is processor affinity. So we will take up this issue, processor affinity, and understand what this is and why this global queue approach suffers from this issue in detail in the next slide. See, the approach that I just discussed about for multiprocessor scheduling is a single queue approach. Now here, what I am discussing about is an independent queues approach or multi queue approach. Here, every processor will maintain its own queue, like shown in the diagram. That is because in the global queue approach, the processor has to obtain the lock on the queue to access the queue, which means that the other processors will be waiting for getting the lock till the process which gets the lock releases the lock, and that is going to waste a lot of time and degrade the performance of the system. So here to overcome that, here we have multiple queues and each queue has got the processes in it. Allocation of processes in this case could be done by the user or by the operating system. So this CPU can only pick up the processes from this queue, and CPU 1 can only pick up the processes from this queue, and so on. In global queue approach, because there is only one queue, if you increase the number of CPUs in the system, then the load on the global queue will increase. Therefore, that approach is not that scalable. Whereas here, since every processor has its own queue of processes, this approach is scalable. Not just that, it is very easy to implement compared to the global queue approach. But this approach suffers from what is known as load balancing. Like here you can see that CPU 0 has got more processors queued up in its queue compared to the other processors, whereas this CPU 2, sorry, I think this should have been 3. CPU 3 has got only one process in its queue. So the load is not equally balanced on these processors. That is the major problem with this independent queues approach. Okay, we are discussing about different ways of implementing a symmetric multiprocessor scheduling. The first approach is using a global queue or a single queue containing runnable processes, and all the processors will pick the processes from this queue. The second approach is using independent queues for every processor. The first approach suffers from what is known as processor affinity, which we are going to discuss in the next slide now. And the second approach suffers from what is known as load imbalancing. We will discuss about that also in the coming slide. Now let us try to understand the issue of processor affinity. We know that uh, suppose we schedule a process P on CPU 1 in a multiprocessor system. This process will bring all the frequently accessed instructions and data into the cache of CPU 1. So what I am trying to say is that it is going to leave a lot of its traces in the cache, which will help the process to run faster, because these are frequently accessed data or frequently accessed instructions. The next time when P wants some instruction, it will first look into the cache. If it is present in the cache, then it will access it from the cache instead of going into RAM and fetching the same instruction, which is going to consume more time. Now in the case of you know uh, the single queue approach that we discussed about, now let's say this process P is now first scheduled on CPU 0, and after some time P blocks for some reason, IO or some reason, and it is brought back into the ready queue. Now there is no guarantee that this process P is again scheduled on the same CPU. It might go to CPU 1. So what happens in this case? Okay, so it is a case of process P which was scheduled on CPU 1 during the first round of its execution, getting scheduled on CPU 2 during the next round of execution. So all the instructions or data related to P which are present in the cache have to be invalidated. Now we have to spend time again in bringing all those frequently accessed data and instructions into the cache of CPU 2. So this will degrade the performance of the system, or this will make the process to take more time for the completion of its execution. So in a nutshell, what I am trying to tell is that P, once it is scheduled on CPU 1, this will develop a kind of affinity, processor affinity towards CPU 1. So what is that processor affinity? It is going to write a lot of instructions, frequently accessed instructions and data into the cache, and it will not access or take them in case if it wants them again from the memory. Instead it takes it from the cache. Okay, so this kind of populating the cache with the frequently accessed instructions and data is what is known as processor affinity. So therefore you will be getting better performance if you are going to schedule the process P on the same CPU till it completes its execution. Now this is the issue which is called as processor affinity issue. Now this processor affinity issue could be handled in two different ways. The first way is that you develop a scheduling mechanism in such a way that it is going to promise processor affinity, in the sense that it is going to promise that the process is not removed from a processor till the completion of its execution, in the sense that if it is scheduled on CPU 1 and goes out of CPU 1 for some reason, the next time it is going to get the same processor CPU 1. That is only a promise, but the algorithm will not guarantee that this process P every time it gets the same processor till the completion of its execution. So that kind of an assurance given by the algorithm is called soft processor affinity. So in this case, the process, it is not guaranteed that the process will get the same processor every time. It might go to some other processor. So what is hard processor affinity? The hard processor affinity is the user can set the affinity in the code itself. That means he can say that my process P has to run on the processor CPU 1. Once he sets that affinity, now there is no way that this process P is going to be scheduled on some other processor during its execution. Every time it resumes, it is going to be scheduled on the same processor. So this is called as hard processor affinity. The Linux 2.4 kernel onwards supports a an API, that is this API, to set the affinity. So how are we solving the issue of processor affinity? The scheduling algorithm tries its best to schedule this process P on the same processor again and again during its execution, but it will not guarantee that it will happen. So that approach is soft processor affinity, whereas the second way of handling this is the user himself is setting the processor affinity in the code, and once that is set, the scheduling algorithm will always look at this processor affinity, and schedule the process on the same processor. Okay, see, the processor affinity issue is not observed in this approach, because when the process enters into the memory, it is put into one of the queues of these processors, and once it is put into one of the queues, it is assured that that process is going to run on the same processor. So therefore this approach will not suffer from the processor affinity issue, whereas it suffers from load balancing issue. Now let's see how load balancing issue could be overcome. Okay, so what is the load balancing issue? On SMP systems, one processor may be overloaded while other may be underloaded. So what load balancing algorithm has to do, it should attempt to keep the workload evenly distributed across all the processors which are present in a SMP system. So there are two techniques for this. The first one is push migration and the second one is pull migration. Now a special task probably running on the CPU all the in fact all the CPUs in the SMP will be continuously monitoring the load. Okay, and if it finds that some processor is overloaded, it will push the load to lightly loaded processors. That way it tries to balance the load. The another way of handling the workload is that the idle processors themselves can run a special task which will also periodically monitor the load on the machine, and if it finds that the load on the processor is less compared to the load on other processors, it can pull the work from the other processors onto this processor. So this kind of approach is called pull migration. Whether it is push migration, what is push migration? Heavily loaded processor is pushing the workload onto the systems or onto the processors which are lightly loaded. In case of pull migration, lightly loaded processors are pulling the work from the heavily loaded processors. Whether it is push migration or pull migration, the process migration comes at a huge cost, because if the process is executed on the processor for some time, it would have left a lot of traces on the cache of that particular processor. So if you are moving that process from one processor to another processor, you will have to invalidate whatever it has written in the cache and bring all that information into the cache of the processor that it gets. So this is a huge uh, task. Okay, so but there is no other go. These are the two approaches for load balancing on the processors in a symmetric multiprocessing system. Okay, we discussed about different process scheduling mechanisms on a multiprocessor computing environment. Let us discuss about thread scheduling in a multiprocessor computing environment. See, we have two categories of threads: user level threads and kernel level threads. User level threads are managed by thread libraries, be it creation of thread, deletion of thread, or scheduling. Okay, scheduling decision is also handled by the thread library. Whereas the scheduling of kernel level threads is done by the operating system. User level threads are, if you recall, they are mapped to kernel level threads using different mapping models. We have discussed those mapping models. The mapping model could be many to one. In that case, one kernel level thread handles many user level threads. It could be many to many. In that case, many user level threads are mapped to many kernel level threads, or it could be one to one. For every user level thread that is created, there is going to be a kernel thread which is going to handle it. So that is one to one mapping model. So this we have already discussed. Now before we discuss about thread scheduling, let's discuss about contention scope, which is very important. You'll have to understand the contention scope very carefully. So there are two levels at which a thread can compete to get the central processing unit to run. One is at the process level, another one is at the system level. If a thread is competing with its fellow threads present inside a process P, then its contention scope is PCS, process contention scope. If a thread could be user thread or a kernel thread, if it is competing with all the threads present in the system. That is, let us say the first thread of process A is competing with the other threads of process B, process C, and so on, which are present in the system. Then its contention scope is system contention scope. Okay, let me repeat. Computation for, in case of process contention scope, computation for the CPU takes place among the threads belonging to the same process. Whereas in case of system contention scope, the computation for the CPU takes place among all the threads in the system. So this has to be clearly understood. Now let's look at this example. So let us look at this example. Let's assume that we have two processors running in the system. Now there are two processors in the system. Now we have to select two threads out of six threads which are there in the system for execution. Now let's see how that happens. Let us assign priorities to these threads. So assigning of priorities to these threads is possible with the help of thread library. Now let us assume that these are the priorities assigned to these threads, and let us also assume that the contention scope of the first thread of process A is PCS, and the contention scope of other threads is SCS, that is system contention scope. And let us also assume that the mapping model used is one-to-one. That is, for every user thread there is an associated kernel thread. Now what happens is, because the first thread's contention scope is PCS, it is going to compete with the other threads which are there in the same process. So that means it is going to compete with the process which has priority 5 and 2, and it will win because it has got the higher priority, right? So this process is selected, this thread is selected which has got the priority 1. Okay, and because the contention scope of other threads is system contention scope, all others will compete, and because this third thread of process A has got highest priority among all those threads, so therefore this thread will win, and the thread 3 of process A is selected for execution. So thus the third thread of process A and the first thread of process A are selected for execution. This is how the thread scheduling happens in a multi-processor computing environment. Suppose that the threads are implemented using POSIX pthread library. POSIX stands for Portable Operating System Interface. Pthread library allows us to set the scope of a thread. This is the API which is used to set the scope of the thread. Scope of the thread could be pthread scope process. So this will set the contention scope of the thread to process, and this will set the contention scope of the thread to system contention scope. Now I have here written an example of setting the contention scope of a thread to system contention scope. Okay, so before creating a thread, its contention scope has to be set, and that will have the impact on the thread scheduling. Okay, this is about thread scheduling, and process scheduling or CPU scheduling in a multi-processor computing environment. Next, I'm going to talk about process synchronization. Let me discuss about the last topic in this module, that is process synchronization. Let's try to understand what is process synchronization and why process synchronization is necessary. Okay, why synchronization? Let us consider this example. This is a classical producer-consumer problem. Producer is a process and consumer is another process, and they are cooperating processes, which means that the execution of producer is going to impact the execution of consumer process, and similarly the execution of consumer process is going to impact the execution of producer process. So in simple terms, producer is a process which produces some data item which is going to be consumed by the consumer process. For example, if you take compiler, compiler is a process which produces what? It produces assembly language program, and this is going to be consumed by assembler. And this assembler produces object code which is going to be consumed by a loader. Okay, here compiler is a producer process, assembler is a consumer process, and similarly assembler could be a producer process with respect to loader, and loader acts as a consumer process. So let us consider such a producer consumer processes, and let's also assume that they are going to share a buffer. Now you can call this as a buffer of fixed size. So therefore you can call this buffer as a bounded buffer. How do they communicate? They communicate using shared memory approach. Now let's assume that these are the variables which are present, data structure and variables which are present in the shared area of producer consumer processes. So this buffer size is defining the size of the buffer. That means 9 items could be stored in the buffer which is shared between the producer and consumer processes. So there is a buffer which is going to hold items. It's an array, and this buffer is a circular array. I hope all of you know what is a circular array. I don't have to explain that, right? So let's assume that this buffer is a circular array. There are 2 pointers in and out, okay, integer pointers. They are pointing to one of the locations of the buffer. Initially both in and out will be equal to 0, which means that the buffer is empty. Now suppose now this int says the next item which is produced by the producer could be put in this location, right? Now suppose I put 10 here, the value of in is going to be incremented. Okay, so what happens to the value of in? In becomes Now 1, or in will point to this location, which means that in says that the next produced item by the producer process could be stored here. Out will be pointing to the same location, saying that the consumer can consume the item from this location. So that's the use of pointer in and out. There is one more variable, counter, which is incremented every time producer produces an item, and it is going to be decremented every time the consumer is going to consume an item. So at any given point of time, if you look at the value of the value of the counter indicates the number of items which are going to be there in the buffer. Now, with the understanding of the shared data structure and variables, now let us look at the structure of producer and consumer process. So both are infinitely running processes. Okay. Now, before the producer produces any item, since it is adding an item into a bounded buffer or a fixed size buffer, so it checks whether counter value is equal to buffer size. So if it is equal to buffer size, it means that the maximum number of items are already there in the buffer. Therefore, process cannot add any more item into the buffer. So if the condition is true, then do nothing. Otherwise, there is space in the buffer. So what has to be done? Use the value of the pointer in as an index to the buffer, because in indicates to which location item next produced item has to be stored. So use the value of in and store the next produced item into the buffer. Once the next produced item is stored in the buffer, the value of in has to be incremented. Now you might be wondering why I've written in plus 1 ampersand of buffer size. This is to implement the circular array. That is, if let us say the in is pointing to the last location in the buffer. For example, in that case, it is going to be 8 because we have taken the buffer size as 9. Now, after I put some item into it, suppose the consumer has consumed item from the 0th location, the in should point to this 0. So how can we make the value of in is equal to 0? That is, we add 1 to this 8 and modulus of 9. So that is equal to 0. Therefore, the value of in becomes 0. That's how the circular array is implemented. So therefore, I increment the value of in this way, and I also increment the value of counter, so that the value of counter indicates that one item is added into the buffer. So when we come to the consumer process, we have to check for this condition, counter is equal to 0. Why? Because if the counter value is equal to 0, that means the buffer is empty and the consumer process cannot consume anything. Like what we did in this case, this condition indicates that the buffer is full and the producer cannot add any more item into the buffer. Similarly here, counter is equal to 0 indicates that the buffer is empty and consumer cannot consume any item from an empty buffer. Otherwise, if the counter value is not equal to 0, that means there is item or there are items in the buffer. So to get the item out of the buffer, the pointer out is made use of. As I told you, out always points to the location where the item, it points to the location where the next item to be consumed is present. So this out pointer is made use of. It becomes an index into the buffer array, and that item at that location is transferred to a variable next consumed. Now that we have consumed one item, we will have to increment the value of out by 1. Because it is a circular array, I have already explained you that it has to be incremented in this manner, because after 8 the out value should become 0. So since we have removed one item from the buffer, the value of counter should get decremented by 1. So once that is done, now the item which is retrieved from the buffer is present in the variable next consume, and which could be consumed by the consumer process. Okay, I have explained the structure of a producer process and the consumer process. You will have to keep this in mind. Now the variable counter is a shared variable. Though the logic of these processes looks okay, but when they are allowed to run concurrently, they malfunction, or they don't function as expected. I will demonstrate that with an example. Okay, now let us consider that the statement counter plus plus, which is present in the producer, and the statement counter minus minus, which is produced in the consumer, are actually implemented at the lower level, at the machine level, like this. The value of counter is transferred to one of the processor registers. In this case, I have taken that register as register 1, and the content of that register is incremented by 1, and it is saved back to the same register. So if suppose the counter value was 5 before this increment operation, okay, that is transferred to the register 1, and 1 is added to the content of register 1. Now therefore the register 1 will have now 6. The same value which is there in the register 1 is transferred back to the counter. So that's how actually the counter plus plus operation or instruction written in higher level language is actually executed. That is split into 3 operations. Similarly, counter minus minus is also split into 3 operations. The value of the counter is transferred to register 2. In this case, I have taken one more processor register 2, and the content of register 2 is decremented by 1 by the accumulator, and the result is stored back to the register 2, and from the register 2 it is transferred to the counter. Counter is what? Counter is nothing but the address of the memory location. So that is taken into the content of that counter is taken into the register inside the CPU, and its value is incremented or decremented depending upon whether you are performing counter plus plus or counter minus minus minus. So that's how the counter plus plus and counter minus minus instructions are actually executed. So you please keep this in mind. Now let's see the problem, a race condition problem, that is associated with the concurrent execution of producer and consumer processes. Okay, now what we are looking at is execution of this counter plus plus and counter minus minus in an interleaved fashion. Okay, so let me show you this slide. So if you see the S naught, I should have used T naught. Okay, S naught is the zeroth statement that gets executed on the CPU. S1 is the next statement, S2 is the next statement, and so on. Now if you observe this carefully, the producer process and consumer process are getting executed in an interleaved manner or concurrently. Now let's consider that now before that counter plus plus and counter minus minus instructions are executed, the value of count is equal to 5. Now uh, counter plus plus should have been counter. So counter plus plus means that producer is adding one item to the buffer. That means what should happen to the value of counter actually? The value of counter should get incremented by 1 and it should become 6. Counter minus minus means that the consumer is consuming an item from the buffer. So that means now this should be decremented by 1 and it should become 5. So one counter plus plus operation and one counter minus minus operation should not change the value of counter. That is because one item is produced by the producer and consumer immediately consuming it. But let's see what happens to the value of the counter. This should have been the actual value of the counter. Okay, now see here the statement counter is equal to register 1 of producer is getting executed first. Because the counter value is 5, 5 is transferred to the register 1. Now the register 1 value is incremented by the accumulator and the result is transferred to register 1. It is incremented by 1, so it becomes 6, so 6 is transferred to register 1. Now the consumer statement, that is the counter is equal to register 2, is executed after this S1. Now you see the counter value has not been changed because the value of register 1 is not yet written onto the memory location counter or written onto the variable counter. So therefore what is there in the counter? The counter will have this 5. So therefore what goes into register 2 is 5 and the content of register 2 is decremented by 1. So therefore what will remain in register 2? It is 4. Now this is what is the value of register 2. Now depending upon after this whether this S4 is executed first or S5 is executed first, the value of counter could be 4 or 6. Now in this case I have assumed that the counter is equal to register 1 statement of producer is executed. So the 6 is returned to the counter because here the register 1 has 6, so therefore 6 is transferred to the counter. Immediately after that the consumer statement, that is counter is equal to register 2 is executed. Therefore the counter value is overwritten with the value present in the register 2, that is 4. So now what has happened to the value of counter after the concurrent execution of these two processes? The value has become 4, which is wrong. Now assume that this S5 is executed before S4 and S4 is executed after that. In that case what happens? The content of register 2 will first go to the counter. So therefore counter will get 4 and that is going to be overwritten with the value of register 1, which is nothing but 6. So final value of counter, it is going to become 6. In either case the value that we get in the counter is not correct. Actually we should have got 5. So why this has happened? Now that is the question. Okay, now we did not get the appropriate value in the shared variable counter because we allowed both the processes to access and manipulate the same data concurrently. Okay, so therefore what has happened to the outcome of the execution, it was depending on a particular order in which the access took place. So this is called race condition. So we did not get the correct uh, output because of the reason that we allowed both the processes to access the same variable concurrently. How this race condition could have been avoided? We should have ensured that only one process at a time no, should have been allowed to manipulate the variable counter. Okay, so that brings us to the point that there should be a kind of synchronization in the execution of producer and consumer processes, because they are cooperating processes and they are going to share a lot of data items. So this clearly tells us that process synchronization is essential. Unless we have a synchronization mechanism to uh, you know execute the cooperating processes, we may end up in what is known as race condition.